Good evening, my boils, my ghouls, and my zools. So I've been getting a lot of questions lately about first AKs, so let's take a look at a few different iterations and talk about the differences with them and help you make an informed buying decision. Yeah, go back to the roots of this channel a little bit with the information for new Kalashers. So the first one we should look at actually is the prize rifle that I showed off last time, the Century Arms Wasser. So when it comes to something like a Century Arms, this is an import, but they do also make US made guns, such as the Visca. You definitely want to stay away from a Visca. Not a good gun. They do have problems, they do have a lot of reported problems. This is on the cheaper scale. You're talking about $1,000 for this thing. People across the board will tell you when it comes to an AK, start with an import. But one thing that you want to be aware of is build quality. Sometimes you will have problems like I was talking about with magazine insertion. This one doesn't like to take magazines so well, and we're going to have to do a little bit of filing. Now, while filing and fitting parts on an AK is completely normal, it is not normal to have magazine fitment issues right out of the box. So to talk about another import that costs considerably more, but you're getting a higher build quality, we should talk about Arsenal. This is a milled receiver. This is an SLR 95. Now what you are getting in a milled receiver versus a stamped receiver, one thing you are getting, rigidity. So you're going to have a little bit, smidge better recoil management. And when it comes to parts fitment, they do fit more rigid. That may or may not be a good thing. AKs are made to have loose tolerances, but it's not like anybody actually purports any kind of cracking issues. You know, like for example, you see the gap here between the receiver and the stock. That's supposed to be like that. So it is still an AK. It does still have its loose tolerances. They are just considerably tighter than a stamped gun. So the biggest difference is the receiver. This is a Wasser. This is a stamped receiver. It is just a folded over piece of stamped sheet metal. That's it. This is milled out of a solid block. You can see the relief cut here just for weight shaving, but that is a solid chunk of metal. And you can actually see on the inside of your receiver, massive difference. Massive difference. It's very thin in here, not much going on. Then you take a look inside a milled one, and it's very thick and robust. You have lots of metal there. But you do not suffer any magazine fitment issues. So those are some good options as far as imports go. A Century Arms, that one is going to cost you about $1,000. When it comes to an Arsenal, they do not make the SLR 95 anymore. This is an old gun, so you're looking at more like a SLR 107, SLR 105, something like that. SAM 5. Arsenal does make stamped guns, but primarily they are known for their milled receivers. So one more option you have when it comes to import AKs is to do what I did for my first AK. Have a parts kit built. So this one is a Romanian front trunnion, Romanian sight block, Romanian sight leaf, Romanian barrel, but the barrel has been cut down. What is the other difference here? Oh yes. I had a Picatinny rail installed on the back because this is a quote-unquote pistol and I intended to keep it as a pistol. So I wanted to be able to use a tail hook. So as I said last time, has a ALG. Doesn't have a safety in it right now because I used it on something else anyway, but it was just some American safety. Oh, the receiver is a Nodak spud. Now you do have a few different options when it comes to receivers. When you buy a parts kit, most of the time it doesn't come with a receiver, so you're going to have to get a receiver. Nodak spuds, they work just fine. Recreators, they work just fine. I haven't honestly seen any of the popular receivers that don't work well. So a much better option than going with something like a Wasser 10, I could say would be a WBP. They make a few different rifles in 5.56 and 2.23. They got the Jack, the Mini Jack, the Lynx, the Fox. They're all really cool rifles. They're really nice rifles. And they also sell parts kits in 7.62, 5.56, and 5.45. They don't sell any 5.45 rifles at the moment. but they do have 5.56, they do have 7.62 rifles, so take a look at those if you're interested. One more option when it comes to the cheaper imports, should mention Pioneer Arms. They are not FB Radom. That should be noted. Despite their marketing, they are not associated with FB Radom in any way. If I'm not mistaken, I believe they were actually the manufacturer that was associated with IO back in the day, and then they became Pioneer Arms after the whole... So I think everybody remembers the IOs for the old rubber buffers back here and the guns never running. And a lot of people know Pioneer Arms these days for their cast front trunnions. They do now use forged trunnions, so I haven't shot any of the guns, but at least they're listening to people. At least they did actually fix that. Now, speaking of FB Radom, should you actually have the money for something like an arsenal, another option is FB Radom. Those come in from time to time from Arms of America. They are the sole importer, though they do share imports with Atlantic Arms, so you can get them when they come in from both of them, but they go really quickly from Atlantic. You're actually better off getting up early in the morning and trying to get one from Arms of America, because they're going to sell out in about 20 minutes. But you also got a better chance of getting a mini barrel than a full-sized barrel. Not too many barrels come into the country, so that's why you see them for quite a bit of money on the aftermarket. They go for more than double their brand new value on the aftermarket. Not the case with a mini barrel. They do still go for a pretty good amount on the used market. They're a fantastic gun. I mean, it's one of the best little crank style guns you can get, especially in 5.56. We will definitely be taking a look at one of those very soon, but that is another option. So a mini barrel, it's going to cost you somewhere around $1,200, give or take. A full-sized barrel, if you can get in on the drop, going to cost you $1,600. If you want one on the used market, it's going to cost you about $3,000. So beware of that. It's kind of an investment if you want to get in on that. So other options when it comes to import AKs, you could just go to Gunbroker or something like that. Arms of America. Just grab a straight up parts kit, whatever caliber, and have an assembler build it for you. An AK builder is going to cost you somewhere in the neighborhood, give or take, about $300. Might be $250, might be $400, somewhere around there. That's how much it costs to get an AK built these days. Another option for the current market when it comes to import AKs, you have Zastava. This is an M90 5.56 AK. It has an 18-inch barrel, so that is one difference from your standard 16-inch, 16.25-inch AK. This one has an 18. It does have adjustable gas. It goes for about $1,250. Despite the 18-inch barrel, it's not overly heavy or anything like that. It is a heavy gun, though, because it does have a 1.5 millimeter receiver. Big difference from the standard AK and the Yugoslavian AK is the 1.5 millimeter receivers. So beware of that. And also, Yugoslavians do not take the same furniture as your standard AKM, so you need to be aware of that. On your standard AK, you have this fixed stock tang back here that extends over, and the stock goes inside the receiver block a little bit, and you screw it down. On the Yugoslavian, you have this long bolt that goes right through the back of the stock, and that's going to be true of all fixed stock Yugoslavian AKs. Now, slightly cheaper, go my favorite, the M85. This is also 5.56. You can get the M92, which is the 7.62 version of this gun. They are both fine options. One thing to note about Zastava is you will hear people every now and again on some deep dark forum complain of soft metal. So they did previously have some rifles come back due to heat treat issues, and apparently they have bought new heat treating equipment, so I haven't seen any evidence of any soft metal on either of my guns, my Yugoslavian guns, but that information is out in the world that that did happen, so, you know, take that as you will. So unless you want to start spending some real money, that's most of the imports you're going to be seeing right up front, right in front of your face. When it comes to American AKs, I don't have too many of them, but I do have a few. I don't have any Riley guns. I've heard they have also improved quite a bit in the past few years. I've heard they're shooters now. They did have some manufacturing problems in the past, but apparently they've actually changed their tune quite a bit, and they're actually making pretty good guns now. I can't confirm that myself. My sample size has been extremely low with Riley, but every one of them I've seen, the gun shoots just perfectly fine. So you got other boutique builders like Lee Armory, Rifle Dynamics, Meridian Defense. They make more high-priced AKs. You're talking in the $2,000 to $3,000 range, but you're getting a little more attention to detail. So Jim Fuller did used to work at Rifle Dynamics. Since he's left, personally, I've seen a few problems with their rifles. I've seen, pretty much everybody I know that has one has had issues with it. So that's one thing to be said. Never heard of an issue from a Lee Armory. I've heard of a few issues out of Meridian Defense, but that was also when they started making more rifles. So yeah, it sounds like a scaling problem. It's not that they make bad rifles, it's just that they can't make a lot of rifles. Happens. That'd be the story of a company called Waffenwerks, if you look into them. Used to be a great company, and then they started putting out some real bullshit. So you can't talk about American AKs without talking about the most visible and the most infamous. Palmetto State Armory. This is an AK-103 from Palmetto State. So this is not a direct copy of an AK-103. It is basically an AKM with a 103 back end. So essentially an AKM in 103 clothes. If you're looking for an authentic 103, I would go with KUSA. They make a damn fine rifle. Both are good options. You will see many more problems out of Palmetto State. They do make many more rifles than anybody else on the market. When it comes to their next competitor down probably sells total what the return rate is on a Palmetto. So that's one thing to think about. Really, the only reason you're going to go for a Palmetto is, they do have a few products that do work out, like the 103. The GF3s are pretty good rifles. Heard some problems out of the GF4s. First generation AK-74s had issues. The new generation, second generation, pretty good guns. The 105s, same thing. Had the first generation that had some bad bolt carriers. Second generation seems to be pretty good so far. So we'll have to see how that keeps working out for them. Having to redo it every single time. So far, sounds like the Jackal's working out, but that's not an AK. We're here to talk about AKs, even though that is a pretty cool little gun. But when it comes to KUSA, they are good. They are fine rifles. They are much more authentic, and their barrel installation is actually much better than Palmetto State Armory. They're not without their problems too. They have their return numbers like any other rifle. So, you might have something like maybe your gas tube lever won't come off and your gas tube won't come off, something like that. It's minor stuff. Your rifle will still shoot most of the time when it comes to a KUSA. It'll shoot when it comes to a Palmetto too. You might have some problems with Century when it comes to stuff like mag fitment or, maybe real tight action or something like that. It happens when it comes to American AKs. Americans have not been building AKs like these other countries have. You have, Romania, Bulgaria, and, of course, Russia and Poland and, all these different countries producing AKs. Ukraine even produces their own domestic AKs. And, they've been doing it for 70 years. So they have a little bit up on us when it comes to the manufacturing side of it. There's a lot of kinks they've already worked out that we haven't worked out. A lot of growing pains they have had to go through. And, they crawled so we can run. And we're running a little fast. That's one thing that's definitely true of all American AKs. We're running a little fast. We're getting there. They are improving. But when it comes to the huge differences of why you'd want to buy American over an import, really the only thing I can think of is warranty. You do get a fantastic warranty and fantastic customer service out of Palmetto. I haven't had to have any customer service from KUSA personally, but they do have a warranty as well. So, that's one thing to think about. When it comes to a parts kit build or an import rifle, you're getting no warranty whatsoever. You're getting only what they, maybe their 24-hour look at it time at the most. You know, you're not really going to get, you know, something like lifetime warranty when it comes to a Palmetto, you know. So when it comes to Palmetto State Armory, KUSA, Riley, they're all American AKs, Century Arms. You know, they're inherently going to be looked at as worse AKs simply because they are not imports. And largely that is true. I mean, honestly, you could do a whole tier list and it wouldn't be that hugely debated on what the best AKs are. About really where it would come in is where you would place a Wasser. Because, I mean, these days they're pretty good guns, but man, did people used to hate them. But a lot of people don't put into account that people used to hate them when there was a ton of them coming into the country. And, you know, people were not knowing how to build them and didn't have things like AK builder jigs. And they're building shitty-ass rifles and going, God damn, these Wassers suck. There's one reason. I've also heard that out of Mac 90s, and that's a fantastic gun, but that's only when it comes to the import parts kit ones that were built in like the 90s. When it comes to those 80s imports, those are really nice guns. Those are really nice guns. Those are direct imports. So another big difference with the imports and the American AKs is features. You're going to see things on import guns like these welded thread protectors, and you know, you're going to see missing bayonet lugs. This one actually does have a US gas block, so it has bayonet lugs, but you could take a look at the Zastava and it has no bayonet lugs. Well, then you take a look at American AKs that don't have import restrictions, and magically you get bayonet lugs, which the only reason this Wasser has them is because it has an American gas block, and the front sight is probably also American. So that's one way they did it. That's one way they did it, because you're not allowed to import with the bayonet lug, so it has to be imported as a sporting rifle. So, does Palmetto have the problems that people purport that they have? They've had problems. Yeah, they've absolutely had problems. Do they fix their problems? Yeah, they do. They also sell quite a bit of rifles. When it comes to how many rifles they get back, it's less than 1% of their rifles that come back in for returns. But their sample size is gigantic, so the amount of bad rifles floating around is actually quite a bit. So it makes it a little more visible, because the amount of rifles they get back is probably the total amount of rifles their next competitor down sells. So, I mean, it's not that far off from reality, honestly. So Palmetto sells a lot of rifles. So that's one thing to put into account is, yeah, you have more chances with a lemon because they have more rifles out there, but percentage-wise, they do have less than a lot of other companies do. So kind of really depends on which way you want to look at that, as positive or negative. It just kind of is what it is. But that's one reason you will see quite a bit of Palmetto haters around. Quite a bit. But, you know, not as many as Century Arms haters. And, you know, really, most of those Century Arms haters don't put into account that they also bring in Red Army Standard. Those AP5s are fantastic guns. Canics, god damn, those are fantastic guns. So really, it's just their domestic manufacturing ain't the greatest sometimes. You know, it happens. But you can't be a master of all trades, so, you know, whatever. They seem to import some okay rifles, and you know, they don't always do the best job at assembling things, but, you know, now and again they got some hits. But, you know, I'm not going to shit on the whole brand just because of a few bad guns. I mean, you know, Visca is, like I said, not great, but Canic, that is a fantastic pistol right there. When it comes to their rifles, I mean, you know, they brought in some really nice Tantals. They brought in some L1A1s that were actually pretty okay. I have one of them myself. We'll have to take a look at that in the future. So really, in summation, you know, when it comes to imports, it's not the end-all, be-all. You know, like I said, you'll have people complaining about the metal on Zastavas being soft, or you'll have people complaining that, you know, Palmetto stuff is out of spec, or, you know, Century stuff will explode. There's really no manufacturer that is 100% perfect across the board. They've all had issues. Like I said, I know a lot of people that have rifle dynamics guns that have issues. So, you know, take it as you will. Personally, I'm worried about whether the gun shoots or not. Each individual gun, but, you know, I've gotten lemon cars before, so I'm not really that worried about it. Just check the gun out, make sure it's a shooter first. Hopefully it doesn't have any problems down the road, like, throating issues. And, speaking of issues down the road, that Galil is the only gun I've ever gotten rid of. And since I put that episode out, I've had a ton of people telling me they had the exact same issue with their gun. I'm talking like 6, 7 different people told me I have that exact same issue with my gun. And it turned out to not just be the 5.56. I've heard this about the 5.45 as well. So, interesting. It's interesting. I don't know what their internal data looks like, but clearly IWI is not perfect across the board either. Every gun company has some problems here or there. Really what you got to do is just know what to look for, make sure there's no abuse on the lugs and everything like that, take a look at the fire control group, see how much it's actually been fired. Like for example, when I got this Arsenal, I was told it only had 100 rounds through it, and then it was stuck in a closet for the last 25 years. And then I opened up and saw the fire control group was the original fire control group and had confirmed barely ever been fired, maybe once or twice. Probably once. So, pretty good deal. So, boils, ghouls, and zools, I just wanted to ramble on about some options just so you have a little bit of information when it comes to your first AK, or, maybe you're just new to AKs, buying your first, second, third AK, something like that. In fact, a good friend of mine just got his first AK yesterday, an FB Radom mini barrel. So, if that shows you where maybe someone's thinking will be going when it comes to a brand new gun. His thinking was that, he doesn't need the warranty if he buys something like a barrel because that's going to be a fantastic gun. He's right. It was a good choice. That is the way to look at it. They are better built. They seem to have better QC, and they have a smaller sample size within that QC to work. So you're going to get a better rifle inherently. So I think he made a good choice. His other choice was an AK-105 from PSA. I actually didn't think that was a terrible choice either because it's his first AK. So my thoughts were, my opinions as he's asking me, what's your opinion on this? I said, I think FB Radom or PSA, it sounds like a crazy comparison, but I don't think it's all that crazy for your first AK because it comes down to the choice of either you get one that is built really, really, really well, or you get one that may be built well, maybe not be built well, but it has a lifetime warranty. So that's one way to look at it, especially for your first AK. If you're not even sure if you're going to stick with the platform or not, that's absolutely good thinking. Warranty. But obviously me and my recommendations, I say go import first. Really depends which way you want to go. This gun could have turned out like shit, so it's a little bit of a gamble. You see, at the time, I didn't really know much about reputable builders, so you got to put into account this parts kit could have turned out like shit. It turned out to be a pretty good gun, but I didn't know at the time about finding a reputable builder. I just got lucky, found a guy that actually knew how to build AKs, and he built me an AK. I'd only bought one gun off him, so I didn't really know the guy. So, he builds a fine AK. Well, my boils, ghouls, and zools, it is that time. I hope you got something out of it. Hope you got some good information. Hope you got something to go forth and make your first AK purchase informed and confident. And if you got some questions, please leave them down in the comments. We'll get to those soon. We're going to have to do a Q&A. I've been getting a lot of questions, man. So, yeah, I will promise you I will never supplement a week's episode with some bullshit Patreon Q&A. It will be separate from a week's episode if we ever do Q&A because that's just not content making. Sorry, In Range. Anyhow, y'all stay safe, have fun, do stupid.